Hello everyone, this is Sprite, and I have a kind of a special video today. So as probably everyone knows, I'm a massive Haruhi Suzumiya fan, and last month, in November 2024, finally we got a new novel released, and I thought, hey, let me rewatch and reread the entire series up to that point, because it's been a while. Like, the last time I rewatched Haruhi was like many years ago, and I thought, hey, now that the new novel has come out, like the last time I reread Haruhi was in 2020 when Intuition came out, and now Theater came out, so I thought, hey, let me just rewatch Haruhi, like actually watching the series, like the anime. I haven't watched it in like maybe 10 years or so. So I thought, hey, let me rewatch the anime and then reread the novels that weren't adapted. I thought, since I have never really talked about Haruhi much, other than like in general terms, I thought, why not make like a casual review commentary about each of the various arcs of the series and leave like make like a tier list type of deal. So yeah, that's what this video is gonna be about. It's gonna be very casual. I don't really have a script plan. I just have like a few notes I took for each of the arcs. And yeah, that's pretty much the format of the video. So sit down, relax, enjoy the ride. I hope you like my ramblings about Haruhi. This is more like for me to talk about my favorite series and why I like it so much. I'm gonna be using mostly the anime for all the arcs pre-disappearance, and I'm gonna be using the novels for the arcs post-disappearance, because those are the ones that weren't adapted. Although I'll make a few commentary about changes between the anime and the novels when appropriate. I'm also going in chronological order, which is a bit iffy just because Tanigawa loves to write things out of order, with one exception, which I'll talk about later. But in general, I'm gonna go in chronological order, which basically means that if you have only watched the anime and don't want to be spoiled on the novels, you can stop at disappearance, because that's the last thing adapted in the anime, and you don't need to watch the rest of the video or listen to the rest of the video if you want to remain spoiler free, and I think that's the best way to do things. Also, I'm not gonna do a normal tier list from like S to D or E rank. I'm gonna be using the SOS Brigade members as the tiers. I had a little bit of discussion back and forth basically with myself about the order of the characters in this tier list, just because like you can rank the members in any way you want. So what I'm gonna be doing is using kind of like Haruhi's image of each member. Obviously Haruhi is the first, is the equivalent to the S tier. Then the second tier, which will be equivalent to the A tier, obviously it's Koizumi, just because he's the deputy brigade's chief. So he's like the second member. Kion is obviously the last member, because he's like the goon, the gopher of the SOS Brigade. The discussion was basically where Nagato and Mikuru would fit, because I could see either Nagato being the third or the fourth ranked member, the same with Mikuru, but eventually I decided to make Nagato the third tier and Mikuru the fourth tier, just because I think Nagato being the third member of the SOS Brigade, in Haruhi's eyes, she maybe ranks a little bit higher than Mikuru, which is just basically a mascot character. And also because Haruhi does appreciate Nagato's, like, she appreciates how much Nagato can like resolve any situation, and like she makes that very apparent throughout the series. So I decided to put Nagato in the third tier and Mikuru in the fourth tier. So basically the tiers will be Haruhi tier, which is the top tier, then Koizumi tier, then Nagato tier, then Mikuru tier, and at the bottom is Kion tier. Even the Kion tier will be kind of equivalent to a D tier. I don't see the Kion tier as like bad. I don't think there's really any story in Haruhi that's objectively bad or like terrible. The stories in the Kion tier are kinda kind of mundane and not really that exciting, but for me, just seeing any story with Haruhi characters, for me is like top tier already because I love the series. Then there will be like a special tier for one story, which I'm not going to spoil yet. Yeah, there's going to be like a one extra tier here, just because there's one story that needs a special tier in that way. So that's the introduction. Let's get started with the judging of Haruhi Suzumiya. I'm not sure how I'm gonna name this video, but I'm calling it the judging of Haruhi Suzumiya. And let's start with the start, which is Melancholy. I think Melancholy is such a good introduction to the concepts of Haruhi and the entire world of Haruhi. It's very balanced in how it does the character introductions, the slice of life stuff, the little hints over the story, and also with all the supernatural shenanigans going on. Like in this same arc, there's a very clear structure. Like you go from Kyon being like just an ordinary guy, he meets this weird girl, Haruhi, and then starts talking to her. Then we go to like the bizarre world of Haruhi, and then when Nagato finally reveals her non-humanness, I guess, and what Haruhi is in her eyes, then we go to another layer of like maybe there's something going on behind the scenes with like the characters. And then when we get the Asakura fight, then we finally get into okay, this is actually like a supernatural story or a story with supernatural elements. And I think that progression is really well made. Like Melancholy is very well written and very well, I guess the anime is very well directed and adapted, because like in just 5 episodes or just the length of a novel, everything is just super compressed. There's not a wasted moment. Every single line, every single scene isn't wasted. It's very clean, very polished. And I think that really helped with making Haruhi something special. By the way, when I say like Haruhi, I might be referring to the series and not the character. Or I should probably say Haruhi series. Anyway, just from Melancholy alone, we can immediately see all the characters, what they're about, their powers, how they work. We get pretty much the introduction of every major character in the story, other than a few that appear much later on. And I think it's such a well-made story. It's really such an inspirational story. I think it's probably one of the best written light novels. Maybe not best written, but in terms of structure, it's really well structured. We even have like some philosophical discussions with Koizumi. We have the scene where Haruhi talks about like realizing the world is much bigger than she thought. Pretty much every single scene in Melancholy is important to the plot. Even the little hints about Kyon's past or Haruhi's past, like there's one scene which is kind of throwaway where Taniguchi and Kunikida are talking with Kyon about like Kyon being interested in weird girls. Like that's such a throwaway line, but it becomes important much later on in the series. Then the whole Haruhi being a weirdo and like in middle school drawing stuff on the school grounds, that becomes important later on. Like every single scene, every single line in Melancholy is so important to the plot and so well done. There's really not much I would change. Like we even have a fight scene with Asakura, and that scene is so well done. And then even the ending of Melancholy, it leaves the hint, which is kind of prevailing throughout the entire series of Kyon and Haruhi liking each other, which I think it's really cute. And the ambiguous ending in the light novels, which is Kyon meeting Haruhi alone and talking or saying to her about talking about espers, time travelers, aliens. That scene, which in the anime is in the ending of Sai, that scene is such a good ambiguous ending for Melancholy, and it kind of lives. And like if the Haruhi series stopped at Melancholy and it never got popular, that would be like the perfect ending for a series. So yeah, I don't have much bad to say about Melancholy, so obviously it's gonna be Haruhi tier, there's really no doubt. I think Melancholy is like the perfect introduction to the series. There's really not much I would change about it. So yeah, that's melancholy. Now, let's move on to boredom. So boredom is the baseball episode. I think boredom is like the quintessential Haruhi story, in the sense that it's like the template for much of the supernatural, like the little story arcs that happen in Haruhi, or what I think makes Haruhi special more than melancholy is like the little supernatural bizarre stories, which the template is basically Haruhi gets excited about something and that causes a supernatural incident and the rest of the crew have to solve it. That kind of template is kind of the quintessential Haruhi experience, and boredom is like the quintessential example of that. So the entire we can't lose this baseball game or the world ends plotline is like perfect Haruhi plotline, and it's ridiculous, it's fun. The actual story, the actual episode is quite fun, and the way they solve, in quotes, the problem Haruhi creates. And I think it really shows just how genius the entire plot of the series is. It's a ridiculous concept, like Haruhi as a concept, or the series, the concept of the entire series is just kind of ridiculous. And I think boredom is just, if you like boredom, you like pretty much the entire series. It's also the introduction of Tsuruya, which is Mikuru's classmate and friend. It's also the introduction of Kion's sister, which are two kinda secondary characters, but they are quite important. Pretty much later on, especially Tsuruya becomes pretty important later on, and I think Kion's sister is just kind of that character which is kind of mysterious because we never find out her name. However, although I like boredom, I don't really care that much about baseball. Although the supernatural incident is interesting, there's really not much to it. It doesn't really advance the plot in any way. Because of that, I think it's a good, like I said at the beginning, I don't think any Haruhi story is bad. So ranking them is kinda going completely on vibes. So for boredom, I'm gonna put it in the Mikuru tier, which is kind of like a C tier. I think it's fine, it's like a good story, but it's not anything like super special. We move on to Mr. X Sign. So Mr. X Sign is the story where there's this girl called Kimidori, which visits the SOS Brigade's website and talks about her boyfriend, which is the Computer Research Club president, has gone missing and like asks for help from the SOS Brigade. And Mr. X Sign is kind of like boredom in the way that it's like the quintessential Haruhi story again. It's a fun little story. I think the resolution is a little bit lame with like the cave cricket. It's kind of nonsensical. I guess Haruhi does have its fair share of like nonsensical plot lines. We do see Koizumi using his powers. We do see Nagato using her powers as well. And of course, it's also into the introduction of like the SOS Brigade website, which is kind of an ongoing joke in the series. And you also get the introduction of the SOS Brigade's symbol, which is kind of iconic in its own way, like the SOS symbol. It also introduces, like I said, Kimidori, which is kind of, again, like a throwaway character you don't think about, but she becomes rather, not really too important, but she becomes important later on in the series. So I like Mr. X Sign, but it's not really that exceptional, so I'm gonna put it in the Mikuru tier as well. So next, it's Bamboo Leaf Rhapsody. So it's the story where Mikuru... Basically, the story starts in Tanabata, which is July 7th, with like a little cute little story where Haruhi like does the whole bamboo leaf hanging stuff in the bamboo tree and asks for like the wishes from all the members. Then Mikuru asks Kion to travel back in time with her to eventually meet the middle school Haruhi and then draw those signs on the school grounds. It's a really cute episode, it's really funny, and it's surprisingly fundamental to the plot because that day in Tanabata 3 years ago is kind of like a focal point of the entire series. We finally see Mikuru do something useful for once because so far she has been kinda like a mascot character and little more than that. So yeah, they go back to like the July 7th to that date like 3 times over the course of the entire series. It's kinda crazy. And it also shows a bit of like Nagato's boredom in the sense that it's revealed that like Kion and Mikuru were like in stasis for 3 years before they eventually woke up. Nagato knew everything that happened to her future self since the beginning. That kind of shows like how Nagato is kind of like a bored character, and I think Bamboo Leaf Rhapsody is the first hint that Nagato is really a bit of a tragic character in that sense. So yeah, this episode, for its importance to the plot, for just how fun it is. Seeing middle school Haruhi, like everything about this story is like amazing, pretty like it's one of the best short stories in my opinion. So I'm gonna put it in the Koizumi tier. I don't think it reaches quite the Haruhi tier, but I think it's a solid Koizumi tier. So next is Remote Island Syndrome, and this is honestly like another banger. It's one of my favorite arcs. So in the same arc, we have a beach episode, we have a murder mystery, we have a reference to Ace Attorney, and we have finally start seeing how Haruhi is slowly changing over the course of the series. And this is one of the things the series does best is show how much Haruhi changes. Not just show how the characters change, like imply change, because the entire series takes place over pretty much a year and something, and showing how much the characters change and evolve and not being like super explicit about it most of the time. I think it's quite genius. Remote Island Syndrome really shows that aspect of the series working, and in particular one scene in Remote Island Syndrome, which is inside the cave when like KyoAni and Haruhi, when they sleep on the cliff and end up in like a cave. And like inside the cave, they are soaked. They are discussing the murder mystery. And then there's a scene where Haruhi like takes off her shirt. And then you see like her about to like take off her bra, but she stops. Ever since I watched the series, I always saw that scene as like showing how Haruhi has changed since Melancholy, where she didn't have a problem with changing in front of the boys. But like here in like the summer of the same year, like a few months later, she now has a problem with like taking off her underwear in front of Kyon. I always thought that scene was really well made. The fun part about that scene is that it's anime exclusive. So Remote Island Syndrome is the first arc that's significantly different from the novels. So in the novels, Haruhi and Kyon never end up in the cave. I think they have that discussion somewhere else, I don't remember where. And there's also Haruhi getting drunk on wine, or the entire SOS Brigade getting drunk on wine at some point. That scene is not in the anime, but it's in the novels, and it's actually referred to in the novels a couple of times. It's actually referenced in Disappearance, the movie. There's like a line where Haruhi is like, oh yeah, but no alcohol allowed because I swore I would never drink alcohol again. That's not in the anime, but it's like a throwaway line in like Disappearance. But yeah, that scene is pretty fun in the novels. But like the overall plot of the murder mystery and everything, it's pretty much the same thing. The Ace Attorney reference, like, what's the chances of like my favorite anime series having a reference to one of my favorite game series? It's kind of amazing. Remote Island Syndrome also introduces Arakawa and Mori, which are then revealed to be members of the agency, and they kind of become important secondary characters later on. They do return a couple of times later. I like both of them, they are quite fun characters. It's also implied that Arakawa was the driver in Melancholy, and in the anime you can literally see the driver is Arakawa. Remote Island Syndrome is like a banger arc. It has pretty much everything, so fittingly enough it's going in the Koizumi tier. Pretty good arc. Alright, so after Remote Island Syndrome we have everyone's favorite arc, The Endless Eight. Alright, it's the one you've all been waiting for. I'm not really sure what I can say about The Endless Eight that hasn't really been said yet. Like, there's a ton of videos on YouTube about Endless Eight, what it means, if it's good, if it's bad. I'll just say, the novel version on its own, I really think it's one of the best Haruhi arcs. Seeing the SOS Brigade deal with the summer events and the ridiculous Haruhi shenanigans, it's super fun, and the existential dread of them getting stuck in a time loop. Then the importance the Endless Eight has on Nagato's character, which is quite an interesting commentary, because never in the novels, correct me if I'm wrong, does Kyon mention that Nagato being stuck on the time loop for 15,000 loops or whatever is the reason why she developed emotions. Like, it's implied, but Kyon never actually says it outright. It's implied that Nagato already was developing emotions before the Endless Eight happened. But I think it's a fairly common interpretation, in which I agree with, that the Endless Eight was kind of the trigger for Nagato's change and growth as a character. and what led later to what happened in Disappearance. So in that sense, Endless Sight is like super important, both for Nagato as a character and for the story as a whole. And on its own, it's actually quite a fun arc. If the Endless Sight was on its own, I would probably give it like a Koizumi tier, like the novel version. However, the anime version is, let's call it, contentious. Some people love it, some people hate it, and I totally understand why people think it's boring to watch the entire 8 episodes. During this rewatch of Haruhi, I made a point of rewatching the entire Endless Sight, which I hadn't done since 2009 or 2010 when I first watched the second season of Haruhi, so it has been years at this point. I was fully expecting to be super bored, I was expecting to be annoyed and whatever, but surprisingly enough, watching the Endless Sight was actually an amazing experience, and I think it gets kind of hypnotic, and I think that's something you can only get binge watching. Like, if you watch the Endless Sight as it came out in 2009, like one episode each week, I understand why it would get so boring and why people kind of lost their minds during those 8 weeks. But binge watching the Endless Sight, I think it's kind of the intended experience. It really is hypnotic, and like time flew by. Like, I watched 6 episodes in a day, and it really was like an amazing experience, and I thoroughly enjoyed everything, like the difference in each episode, like predicting what their next lines would be, like the slight differences between the different episodes. I think it's really well done, and I think it's a work of art. I understand why many people don't like it, and like, if you are one of those people who think the Endless Sight is like ruins the show, I understand why you think that. I disagree. I think the Endless Sight, if anything, I think it makes Haruhi even more special than what it would be otherwise. You don't need to watch the entire Endless Sight if you don't want to. You just need to watch, I think the minimum I would recommend watching of the Endless Sight would be the first episode, then episode 5, which is like the most different episode, and I think the one with the best like choreography or cinematics of all the episodes, because there's like the clock, the visual of the clock, the clock changing, the minute hand of the clock like ticking, and the screen moving along with the clock. That's super interesting visual, super interesting animation. And then the last episode. So I think at a minimum you should watch at least 3 episodes of the Endless Sight. I think you should watch, because like, if you are one of the people who will like Endless Sight, I think saying you shouldn't watch everything, I think it's robbing of that experience. I also think people who like get angry or like think the Endless Sight ruins the show, I think they are just being a bit... I understand, and like, art is subjective, but I think the Endless Sight is so well done for what it's... I don't think it's perfect. If like if your entire argument for the Endless Sight being you don't want to watch it because it's boring, I understand. But more than that, I think there's really no ground to stand. The Endless Sight is the best done version of that idea. In that sense, I think you shouldn't really criticize it for other things. So in case some people don't know, the Endless Sight, each episode is different, and each episode was directed by a different guy. And like episode 5, which I talked about earlier, has a unique soundtrack. Like, there's like a few songs that are like a remix of the generic Endless Sights, like the Endless Sights, that song that plays during the various mundane activities that they have. There's like a different, the episode 5 has like 4 or 5 different versions of that song, like the same melody but in different styles. That if Kyoto Animation didn't care about what they were doing, they wouldn't go that far. That said, I don't think the Endless Sight is perfect, and I think the biggest criticism I have of the Endless Sight is they could have used those extra episodes to show more of the supposed activities the SOS Brigades partook in during the summer, during the few episodes or the few loops where things were different. Like, I think that was kind of a lost opportunity to like show more activities they did during the summer, like different part-time jobs when they went to the Bon Odori festival, or when they didn't go to the pool. Like, those different things I think could have been... I think they stuck too much to the original script. I think that's like the biggest complaint I have about Endless Eight, because the execution itself, other than that, I think it's pretty much perfect. Hello, this is Editing Trite. Apologies for the different audio, but I had to record a little bit of a correction to the initial audio. So when I initially recorded these opinions, I had the Endless Eight on the Tsuruya tier, which was like the chaotic tier, and that was the exception I mentioned at the beginning of the video. But while I was editing, I remembered there's a much better character to represent the Endless Eight, and that is, of course, Yasumi Watahashi. If you don't know who Yasumi is, she's a character introduced much later on in Surprise. She's kind of the sixth member of the SOS Brigade, but also not really. I think that's just perfect to have as the extra tier for the Endless Eight, because Yasumi herself is a bit special. I'm gonna talk a little bit more about her in the Dissociation and Surprise section. So I thought Yasumi is a much better character to represent the Endless Eight. Anyway, back to the original recording. So, we reach the end of summer, and now we get the second full-length novel and the second arc in the novels, which is Sai. So Sai is the story of the SOS Brigade making their movie. I think Sai is a solid story. I don't think it's amazing, especially as a follow-up to Melancholy. I think it's fine, but it's also not exceptional. Like, the concept is good, like the concept of Haruhi confusing reality with fiction. What she wants to happen in the movie starts to happen in real life. I think that's really fun, a really fun concept. There's a bunch of Koizumi more philosophical talking, so that concept is really interesting. The resolution is also great, about Kyon solving the issue by having Haruhi say everything in the movie is just fiction, and every similar to real events are just coincidence. That's really like the stereotypical resolution to a Haruhi situation. We also get the introduction of Shamisen, the talking cat, which then later becomes Kyon's cat. Shamisen is it's a really nice addition to the cast. He's a really cool character, if you can call it that, or a really like supernatural thing. However, the anime kinda adapts Sai in a strange way. I don't know if anyone else feels this, but like the episodes are cut in a really weird way. Like they like cut in the middle of entire scenes, and I think making Sai 5 episodes was kind of a mistake. I think Sai could have been easily just 4 episodes. Yeah, it drags a lot, like there's a lot of conversation, it drags a lot. It's a very faithful adaptation to the novels, but it's also very slow, very... like, it feels like kinda watching molasses flow. And I think the adaptation of Sai is one of the few points in the anime where like the adaptation kinda missed the mark for me a little bit. But Sai is still an important story for the overall plot. So I like it. I don't think it's like one of the most amazing stories in Haruhi, but I still like it. So I'm gonna put it in the Nagato tier. Oh yeah, I also got to see Nagato with her witch hat and Mikuru with her waitress outfit and whatever. So more outfits for Mikuru. That's always cool. So now we come to the actual movie, which might surprise some people, is actually a story in the light novels, which is The Adventure of Mikuru Asai in episode 00. So this is the movie they shot during Sai, and it's like one of the additional weird things about Haruhi, where the characters make a movie and then the movie becomes its own story in universe. That's a really interesting concept. It's actually quite fun seeing like the plot of the movie, because during Sai we only got a weird view of the actual plot. We only got like the snippets of the plot. Oh yeah, I forgot to mention, during the movie we got the introduction of Mikuru Beam, which is kind of a meme. That's also pretty cute. Anyway, we see the ridiculous movie play out, just the nonsensical stuff Haruhi makes about the movie, the weird cuts, all of that. The anime really makes the story much better, because the actual anime adaptation, the actual episode, it's kind of fun, like seeing the weird shots and the poorly shot scenes, the weird animations, all that stuff. The anime really made it that much better. And the actual anime movie, the anime episodes, it's a really cool introduction to the series to returning fans. At least I watched The Adventures of Mikuru Asahina as the first episodes of my rewatch, and it's really cool, like seeing all the characters act out, and then Haruhi shows up at the end, kind of like as a grand reveal, and I think that's just perfect way to like reintroduce the series to fans. However, the actual story of The Adventures of Mikuru Asahina is just completely bonkers. It doesn't make any sense. At some point, the like nonsensical stuff starts becoming a little bit boring. In general, although I like it, I think it's not really like a story that's all that amazing. So yeah, I'm gonna put it in the Kyon tier. So it's our first story in the Kyon tier. I don't think it's like terrible, but yeah, it's not amazing by any means. It's not one of the best stories, that's for sure. In comparison, next is Live Alive. So Live Alive is the episode where we get to see the events on the cultural festival. Like, what's not to like about Live Alive? Live Alive is the first purely slice of life episode. I guess a Remote Island Syndrome kinda counts, although the typhoon is even implied to be caused by Haruhi. But like, what's there not to like about Live Alive? We get to see the pure slice of life stuff Kyon gets up to. We see Tsuruya and Mikuru in their uniforms. Like in the anime, we see all the crazy people walking around school. It's even implied that some of them are just like sliders from another world. And then we have the extremely famous scene of Haruhi singing in the novels. That scene is just Haruhi went on stage and sang a song. That's pretty much it. Yeah, the anime just makes this so much better. Like God Knows and Lost My Music are like, I think, iconic songs. I guess saying God Knows is like an iconic song. Pretty much, if you know Haruhi, you know God Knows. It's an amazing song. It's like an amazing rock song. Lost My Music is also quite a good pop song. That entire scene, the animation, the hype there, like completely catches you off guard. And I think it's one of the main strengths of the Haruhi series. It's how it can combine so many different genres together in like one show. We get slice of life, supernatural, urban fantasy, action, musical or music, story, school life. Like Haruhi is like a potpourri, a hodgepodge of ideas, and it really encapsulates what makes like the anime, like the otaku media, anime media, Japanese pop culture so fun, I think. And like Haruhi kind of combines all of that stuff, and I think Live Alive really is a perfect example of that working. And yeah, that scene with Haruhi singing also shows how much she grows as a person, or how much she grew as a person until this point, because she's willing to help complete strangers. She didn't know the girls who couldn't sing on stage. She's willing to help complete strangers with their problems now, and that's something the old Haruhi would never do. So Live Alive is both fun to watch, the music is amazing, it's really well produced, and it's also important for Haruhi's growth as a person. So what's not to like about Live Alive? I'm gonna put it in the Koizumi tier just because it's not really that plot important. And I just realized I forgot one story. I have to make a note here. I forgot about like one of the most forgettable stories, and I know exactly where I'm gonna put it. So after Live Alive, we have kind of a big jump in time. So Live Alive happens like in September, and then we get to the day of the Sagittarius. Sagittarius? I think it's Sagittarius. So the day of the Sagittarius is that episodes with the computer game against the Computer Research Club. That's one of those arcs that really get elevated so much by the anime, because in the novels it's described as them being like in space, and then it jumps to the computer stuff. It's so much better seeing the actual animations and the space battle going on, and then the actual computer stuff. So the anime, the arc itself is fun, like the Computer Research Club challenging the SOS Brigade for the computer back and cheating to get it, and then Nagato going berserk and hacking, or not hacking, but using like the yeah, she hacks them or disables the cheat and then goes berserk with the manual mode to completely ruin their day. We'll see a little bit of Nagato's skills and also a little bit of her growth as a character. And like, it's just fun seeing them play a game and then Haruhi going berserk. It's a purely non-supernatural story, but I think it's actually quite fun, so I'm gonna put it in the Nagato tier, fittingly enough. It's a fun story. It's like a fun middle of the road or a little bit above average story for Haruhi. Yeah, there's not much to say. Oh yeah, the music on the Day of the Sagittarius is actually like an actual real composition. And if you listen to the, I think there's an album, the orchestral album for Haruhi, and they have the full, I think it's a symphony, which was adapted in the anime to the music on the Day of the Sagittarius game. Yeah, that's like one of those little Easter eggs. They're really fun. So that's a Nagato tier. And then we get to Someday in the Rain. So I kind of used to hate Someday in the Rain when I first watched it. I always thought it was a really boring episode. Nothing happens. There's no real story other than Kyon goes get a space heater for the club. But actually, I think Someday in the Rain is kind of... there's a certain beauty to Someday in the Rain, the actual kind of melancholic mood the entire episode is set on. It's kind of fun seeing like the little moments. I think Someday in the Rain is about the little moments, like Kyon getting the space heater, returning to the club room, then falling asleep, and then Haruhi waiting for him in the club room and putting both her and Mikuru putting a cardigan on him. It kind of shows Haruhi cares for him. It shows she probably has some affection towards him. The actual last scene is also cute. So Someday in the Rain is kind of calm before the storm that is Disappearance. And I think that's kind of beautiful in its own way. Anyway, nothing really supernatural happens. I think it could have been done a little bit better, maybe with some more dynamism. I think it's kind of boring. Oh yeah, it's also the only anime-only episode on the series, like that doesn't have a counterpart in the novels. So I'm gonna put it in the Kyon tier. I don't really hate it anymore. I still think it's kind of whatever episode. It's fine. Like Someday in the Rain is fine. It's not like my favorite episode. It's not really terrible. I think it's fine. But now we get the calm before the storm, and now we get to the storm, which is Disappearance. So I think Disappearance shows how genius Tanigawa is as a writer, and I really think he's a great writer, especially in terms of like preparing like groundwork for his future stories. And Disappearance is such a good story on its own. It's kind of like a convergence point of the entire series. Like the entire series converges on Disappearance. Everything the story has been constructing on the characters, on the plot, leads to Disappearance beautifully. And like Disappearance is it probably started with such a simple idea, like what if Haruhi Suzumiya disappeared? I think it really, the reason why Disappearance works for me is because it's so different from everything the series made. Melancholy, like you get to see the end of the world in quotes at the end of Melancholy. As a viewer, you don't really have much attachment to the characters at that point, especially if you watch them in chronological order. At that point, like, you have just been with these characters for like 5 episodes. But the reason Disappearance works is because the entire build-up to it, especially if you watch chronologically, it's really... not especially if you watch chronology, especially if you watch the anime, because the anime has more, like, the Disappearance is the 4th novel, and the 5th and 6th novels are like short story collections, and some of them were adapted to everything before Disappearance was adapted. If you read the novels, Disappearance is the 4th volume, and like you have a little build up, but not really that much. In the anime, you get even more build up. You get Endless Eight, you get Day of the Sagittarius, you get Live Alive, you get The Adventures of Mikuru as in episode 00. All that stuff in the novels was released post Disappearance, and Disappearance works because it's such a dramatic tone shifts. So like you go from melancholy, end of the world, but you really aren't that connected to the characters, and then you have an entire story where the stakes are relatively low. Like in Boredom, you get, oh yeah, the world might end if Haruhi loses the game, whatever. But like the stakes are always pretty low-key and pretty disconnected from Kyon. But then in Disappearance, everything changes. Like the stakes are Haruhi has gone missing, the world has changed, and that hits so hard on Kyon as a character, and as a viewer, it hits you equally hard because you have grown fond of Kyon and the SOS Brigade antics. So when they disappear, it's kind of like, oh shit, what is happening? The plot, there's a certain constant sense of urgency in this appearance, and that would be fine on its own, but then there's the return of Ryoko Asakura. She's the cover art character for this appearance, for the novels. There's the entire SOS Brigade not really caring about Kyon and not knowing who he is. All that is such a massive tonal shift for the series, and that's why this appearance works. And then we have the actual villain, in quotes, of the story, which I think it's pretty unexpected. Like, who hasn't watched this appearance would ever think Nagato would be the one to pull the trigger, right? Because at that point, Nagato is built as like the bedrock of the SOS Brigade. She's like the one reliable character, you can always count on her. She's kind of in the background, like the one you can rely on, and both as an audience and Kyon as a character think of Nagato that way. But that's precisely why the shifts on Nagato's character that occurred in this appearance is so massive. Both as a villain and like her real self in this appearance. Not really a real self, but her human self in this appearance is hits so hard, because you're like, yeah, this Nagato is objectively more engaging as a character, but you've grown fond of the quiet alien bookworm at that point, and that's why Nagato's reveal that she's the guilty party hits so hard. You also get back to the July 7th in the past. Again, the day where Kyon helped Haruhi, and the day, and like he calls back to her to say, don't forget about John Smith. All that stuff happens in this appearance. But then, like, all of that is like in the novels. And like, I think the novel is surprisingly short, and I think the novel is pretty much like Melancholy. It's very on to the point, very straight, doesn't really waste time. But then the movie, like, I think it's fairly universal to say that the Disappearance movie is one of the best anime movies ever made, and probably one of the best anime movie series ever made. Not only because the story or the original material was already great, but the Disappearance movie just makes it 10 times better. Like, the Disappearance movie is so beautiful, especially that scene where KyoAni is like battling with himself and deciding that he does love the supernatural shenanigans he gets into. That moment is so well animated. Like, the entire movie is beautiful. It's KyoAni at its best. I think there really isn't anything like it. And when some people say, yeah, watch Melancholy, or the main series, The Melancholy of Haruhi Suzumiya, for the Disappearance movie, I kind of get a bit angry, but I get where people are coming from, because the movie really is that amazing. It really is one of the best things anime has ever done. There really wasn't any doubt. Disappearance is the best arc in the series by a wide margin. It's going in the Haruhi tier. Was there ever any doubt about that? It's a Haruhi tier. Now we get to the unadapted stories. So everything from here on is spoilers for the novels. So if you haven't read the novels, don't continue listening or skip to the end. I'm going to continue going in chronological order, although there's a little bit of hiccup here with the timeline, because some arcs have parts that happen in between other arcs. Anyway, so final warning, from now on, spoilers. I'm going to spoil the stories. If you haven't read the novels yet, I highly recommend you do, and then you can come back and hear my thoughts. Alright, so next is Love at First Sight. So Love at First Sight is the first story that happens chronologically after Disappearance. It happened like a few days after Disappearance. Initially, I was a little bit... I didn't really like it very much. So Love at First Sight is that story where there's like an old friend or a classmate of Kyon who saw Nagato like randomly in the street with him one day, and he fell in love with her because he saw like an aura around her. Then he insists on Kyon arranging a meeting between him and Nagato to see him play like an American football game. In the end, it turns out that the guy was just seeing the data over mind talking through Nagato or connecting with Nagato. At the end, Nagato, Kyon asks her if she was disappointed that he wasn't actually in love with her, and she says just a little bit. And I think Love at First Sight, I initially didn't really like it because it wasn't really much supernatural shenanigans going on. But actually, on a second reading, I think Love at First Sight is actually quite good. We get like the guy completely obsessed about Nagato, which is super fun, and you are like, wait, what's the deal with this guy? Then we have like the Kyon reciting his like love letter to Nagato, and then Haruhi catching it and like grilling Kyon and almost throwing him out the window. That's a really fun scene. And then during the football match, Nagato causes him an injury and then shows up at the hospital and is like super disappointed. Like, it's a really throwaway story, and I think it's a really cute story, kind of melancholic in a way, about like Nagato's alienness causing like her a little bit of sadness. Like, she's clearly disappointed that the guy wasn't actually into her, and it shows that she's actually developing emotions, like Kyon says. So Love at First Sight, I actually quite like it. I think it's kind of a really fun story, and it grows Nagato as a character a bit. So I'm gonna put it fittingly enough in the Nagato tier. I think that's a pretty solid ranking for it. So next is Snowy Mountain Syndrome. So this is the first story I read after Disappearance, and initially I loved it. I was like, oh my god, this is like the best arc ever. But in subsequent readings, I'm kinda grown to not like it as much. So Snowy Mountain Syndrome is kinda the sequel to Remote Island Syndrome. It's we get to see the famous Haruhi Hotpot after Disappearance. Then the brigade goes to like Tsuruya's mountain villa, and they like go on ski and ski around, and Kyon's sister also goes. But then the SOS Brigade members get lost in a blizzard, and they end up in like a mysteriously well-stashed mansion with like food and stuff, and where the time inside is all wonky, and then you get the scene with the room visitors, where each character gets visited by a different person, and Kyon obviously gets visited by Mikuru. I initially thought that that meant like their romantic interests, but actually that was like all Nagato's doing to hint at like the solution for them to escape the weird closed space. There's a lot of like Koizumi philosophical ramblings, which I always enjoy. It's also the first concrete interference, we'll learn this later on, of a new faction besides Nagato's the Data Overmind. So that's pretty, that's the first concrete evidence of their existence. Yeah, I think that faction is the Heavenly Canopy Dominion. So yeah, Snowy Mountain Syndrome is kind of cool. It's important for the plot. I don't really like the resolution. It's kind of lame, like the whole equation Nagato setup. Like, it feels a bit too contrived. I kind of expected like a more physical puzzle than like solving an equation. It feels kind of weird. I still think it's a super fun story, so I'm gonna put it in the Koizumi tier. Okay, next is Where Did the Cat Go? So this happens immediately after Snowy Mountain Syndrome, and it's basically like another mystery, like the one that happened in the Remote Island Syndrome, set up by Koizumi, but this time everyone knows it's a mystery, it's like a joke. It happens in the Tsuruya villa, and the problem with Where Did the Cat Go is like it's set up as being this big convoluted mystery, but the problem is that when you know what happened, it kind of on a second reading it felt kind of a bit lame, to be honest. I just didn't really like the mystery that much. Like, the way like the cat is connected to the murder, it's kind of like, why is the murder there? Like, I don't know, maybe I didn't understand it very well. So I don't think the mystery was all that exciting. I think the thing with the shamisen and the shamisen the second was cute, like two cats. Like, the actual mystery is kind of fun. The whole setup is just way too dragged to be that engaging. Although seeing Haruhi and Tsuruya go back and forth was fun. It's also fun seeing Nagato playing like that face game. There's a name for it, I can't remember. It's also fun, but I don't think it's more than a Kyon tier. It's probably one of the worst stories in the series, to be honest. I didn't really like Where Did the Cat Go very much. It's kinda whatever. Yeah. So another whatever story is Random Numbers, which happens chronologically on like the third day of the new year. And this is like the first story in Intuition. I don't have much to say about Random Numbers. I think it's the shortest story in the series. It's like only 20 pages. It's pretty much really a nothing burger. Even the whole random numbers thing, like it starts with Koizumi, oh yeah, I randomly multiplied these 3 numbers and then they mean nothing. And then in the end, actually, Haruhi manages to bring those 3 numbers back to being relevant for what Koizumi was saying. And it's like, oh yeah, Haruhi can control coincidence and logic. It's like, it's kind of, I don't really like it. I honestly, I don't really. I think the same concept could have been done way better if like the numbers were actually important. Like if Koizumi was like, yeah, I was thinking about these 3 numbers because today I wanted to get a yukata or whatever. It's never really set up like that. Koizumi is just like, oh, I just thought of these 3 random numbers and they connect in this way. Like it feels a bit contrived just to have. I think that the entire plot of Random Numbers started with Tanigawa wanted to make the scene of Kyon carrying Haruhi on his back. And like that's a cute scene and that's really fun, but he could have probably not have the random numbers part or make it a bit more exciting. I don't really know. It's a Kyon tier, although that scene with Haruhi is cute. I think it's a Kyon tier. It's overall like a bit of a nothing burger. So yeah, the new year isn't starting very well. So then we now come to a story I actually forgot to take notes for because it's so forgettable. And I think this story is where Tanigawa starts going a little bit off the rails with the writing. To be honest, like I still think he's a good writer, but the stories kinda start going a little bit belly up. The story I'm talking about is The Melancholy of Mikuru Asahina. So this is the story where like Mikuru is all melancholic one day and she's like, Kyon, come with me to buy tea. And he's like, this is suspicious. And they go on like a pseudo date and they go buy tea. And in the end, they have to go to a specific place, like save a random kid from like being hit by a van. And Mikuru is like, oh, I'm so bad at this. No one tells me anything. So this is what we were supposed to do. And like the story, it's kind of okay. It's not really that exciting, to be honest. It's good, but I was never really that excited about it. It's just like it could have been easily put in intrigues, maybe. I think it's just okay. It's just like an okay story. It's important for the plot, so I'm putting it in the Mikuru tier. But the story itself is just kind of fine. I think in general, I think the problem is just Mikuru as a character. She's easily the worst of the SOS Brigade members, or the least interesting. I think Mikuru could have been made a much more interesting character if Tanigawa wanted to, but the fact that she's just like a cute mascot, and he really tries to make her more important, especially in the next arc. But I think this story shows just how much Mikuru is the worst character of the SOS Brigade. Like, I still like her as a character, but she really is the worst of the 5 main cast, and even considering some of the secondary characters. Like, the kid is important, and later on in Intrigues we'll learn why the kid is important. Actually, you do learn in Melancholy. In Melancholy, the kid is like Mikuru reveals that he's important for like time travel stuff in the future. But yeah, the problem with the Melancholy of Mikuru Asahina is just that Mikuru as a character, she's kind of okay. She's not really an amazing character. This mini arc shows why Mikuru kind of the worst character of the SOS Brigade members. So yeah, this is a Mikuru tier. It's kind of okay, but nothing special. Just because it advances the plot, I think it deserves more than just the bottom tier. But the story is so forgettable, I actually forgot about it. So next is Intrigues. So this story is also one of the ones I expected to not like as much, but I actually think Intrigues is pretty fun. So basically the story is that Mikuru randomly shows up in the broom closet of the SOS Brigade club room. Kyon has to like hide her existence as well as help her do like random things to like save the future or set the future in the correct path. Honestly, Intrigues is best when it's about the little things. For example, the Mikuru interacting with Nagato in her house is like, I think, one of the best scenes in the series, because we see Mikuru just being completely uncomfortable, like Mikuru being uncomfortable around Nagato, and like them eating dinner together, and like we see Nagato eats like this canned food, like weird chili canned food. That whole scene is like super charming with Kyon around. We also see a little bit of Nagato being a bit more considerate about Mikuru, that she understands like why Mikuru is uncomfortable around her, and that's why she doesn't really mind Mikuru not staying with her. We also get a little bit more of Tsuruya. We see the Tsuruya mansion, actually see the Tsuruya mansion in Sai. But here we go back to Tsuruya and we see Tsuruya being like an honorary SOS Brigade member, and her being kind of on the side, but knowing that all the characters in the brigade are weird, but she doesn't want to get involved either. So she's like in uncomfortable, like watching things comfortably in the sidelines. So that's an interesting take for Tsuruya, and that's why I think Tsuruya is quite a good character. Like the fun part about Intrigue is like the little things, like Koizumi being left in the dark about the whole thing. It's just hilarious. Him being like, why did you bring me to time travel with you? Why aren't you telling me about Michiru Asahina? We also get the introduction of like the evil time traveler, Fujiwara, and the Kyoko Tachibana, which is the anti-Esper faction, or the other Esper faction. We get the whole Haruhi bringing people around to dig in the mountain, hiding the Valentine presents, for Valentine chocolates for Koizumi and Kyon. Then Kyon telling Tsuruya that there's actually a mysterious artifact there that's like a major Chekhov's gun on the series that still hasn't fired. So it's still like the artifact Tsuruya found, it's still like there in the background. So like all that stuff and like the things they do during Intrigues are kind of fun. All that stuff is fun. The Mikuru kidnapping, all that's good. Then there's like a problem, and I think the big problem is the prologue, where the prologue is Kyon solving, in quotes, the problem in disappearance, where he had to come back in time to save himself. I think that should have been its own story, and like the fact it's stacked on the prologue of Intrigues, it doesn't really connect with anything that happens in Intrigues at all. So I don't know what's it doing there. It should have been its own sort of story. I don't know. Like that scene is fun with Kyon going back in time, but it's kind of like tacked on in Intrigues. And I think Intrigues is the first volume where we get Tanigawa's tendency to like start rambling a little bit. Intrigues is like the biggest arc so far. It's a really thick book. I think it's the thickest book, excluding Surprise, which is a double. In English is the double book. It's like 2 books in one. I think Intrigues, it's important for the plot. It's actually quite fun, but on the other end, I think it goes on too long and it's a little bit contrived. So that's why I'm putting it in the Nagato tier, but it's still better than what I expected coming in. So yeah, Intrigues it's fine. It's kind of middle of the road fine. All right, so then next we have Editor-in-Chief Full Speed Ahead. This is the first story of Indignation, and actually it might be one of my favorite stories. Basically, the student council president finally makes an appearance, and like he calls Nagato, and he's basically like, you have legal occupants in your room, you're the only member of the literature club. What are you doing with our literature club money we give you? Basically. And there's like this whole confrontation with Haruhi, and she's like, yeah, we're gonna make an anthology of stories and publish it as the literature club. Then it's revealed that actually the student council president is actually or like an infiltrator of the agency, and is like related to the agency. And then it's revealed that Kimidori, she returns finally, and it's confirmed she's a humanoid interface like Nagato. That whole plot like set up by Koizumi and whatever, it's just super fun. And then the actual making of the anthology, it's super interesting for me. Like, they all have to write stories, and the stories themselves are quite fun. The Mikuru story is kinda whatever. It's interesting, like, it's all illustrated, it's very cute, but clearly Haruhi made a lot of editorial decisions there. Then Nagato's story is just weird, like, it's super weird, like, it's kind of horror, but not really. But it also shows how Nagato thinks a little bit, and it's kinda difficult to interpret, and I think that's the point. And then Kyon's story is actually super cute. It's about Miyokichi, which is like a friend of Kyon's sister. Kyon kind of frames it as like him going on a date with a girl, but actually it actually hints that Myokichi is just the friends of his sister. Like that whole plot, it's super cute, like Kyon's story. The entire thing is wrapped up very well, so I don't really have much to say about the editor-in-chief. It's Koizumi tier, easily. It's really good. I actually quite liked Editor-in-Chief. It's one of the best non-supernatural stories so far. I think, yeah, one of the best. Super solid. But then the other story in Indignation is Wandering Shadow. Wandering Shadow on its own is good. The problem with Wandering Shadow is that it's basically Mr. X sign again. Like the story of Wandering Shadow is that there's like ghosts in like haunting like a specific spot in like a road of one of the girls who in KyoAni and Haruhi's class, and she's like the ghosts are scaring like the dog or like the dogs there, and then the SOS Brigade goes to investigate and they find out that the dogs have been infected by like a space virus thingy, but it's basically the same thing as Mr. X sign, except without the fight against the cave cricket. So in the end, Wandering Shadow is just Mr. X sign, but significantly less fun for me. Although there's a cute scene with like Nagato doing like the ritual to heal the pets and using Shamisen as a host for the space virus is kind of fun. Other than that, like Wandering Shadow is really not much of anything, and it's kind of disappointing to see like Wandering Shadow. It's kind of fine, but yeah, it's just fine. So I'm gonna put it in the Kyon tier. At least we saw Mikuru in a Shrine Maiden outfit, but it's clearly a Kyon tier. So next is the biggest arc in the series, which is the combo of Dissociation and Surprise. So basically, this is just one big arc divided into 3 volumes. So easily the longest in the series. Dissociation is good. Like Dissociation and Surprise is good, but it just drags on too long. I think there's easily like an extra book there that shouldn't be there. So the basic plot of Dissociation is like, it's like a new year, Kyon and Haruhi are still in the same class, but now an old friend of Kyon in Sasaki shows up, and Sasaki is the weird girl being hinted at during the entire series, and she finally makes an appearance. I think Sasaki is really the linchpin of Dissociation and Surprise. And alongside Sasaki, she brings Kyoko Tachibana, which showed up in Intrigues, alongside a new alien, which is a Kuyo-suo, which is like the creepy alien girl with like the big hair and weird demeanor. And from that meeting with Sasaki, Haruhi gets all worried that something's gonna happen with the worlds subconsciously, and she creates closed space and everything. From there, the timeline splits, and that's like the big thing, the big twist, or the big drive force of Dissociation and Surprise is the split timeline. Basically, the story goes or follows 2 different timelines that split when Kyon is one day in the bath and when Sasaki asks to meet him again and to have like a meeting with all the anti-SOS Brigade members, which is herself, Kyoko Tachibana, Kuyo-suo, and Fujiwara, which is the time travel guy. And the timeline splits. So in the Alpha timeline, basically Sasaki never calls him, and it's implied that's because there's like a brand new character, my favorite character in the entire series maybe, which is Yasumi Watahashi. Yasumi Watahashi is like people like, or at least Wikipedia describes her as a Deus Ex Machina, and basically her point in the story is to prevent Sasaki from ever contacting Kyon and putting the entire plan of the anti-SOS Brigade in motion. And basically the Alpha timeline is pretty much plain slice of life story about just them hanging out and having the freshman applications for the club. Basically Yasumi like worming her way into the SOS Brigade, and like she's super cute. Like I love Yasumi Watahashi, like making her way into the club and like everyone being, or at least Kyon being concerned, what's her deal. Then the beta timeline is focus on Sasaki. Sasaki is like Kyon's friend from middle school. Basically, Kyoko Tachibana and the others think Sasaki, or at least Kyoko Tachibana mainly, want Sasaki to like inherit Haruhi's powers or take on Haruhi's powers because Sasaki is more stable than Haruhi. And Sasaki can also create closed space, which is kind of a big deal in the plot of the series. And so, like the entire beta timeline, Nagato gets sick. We have the return of Asakura again. That scene in Asakura is quite good, and the fight with Kuyosuo is quite good. Kimidori also makes an appearance and finally shows her powers. Nagato being sick and them caring about her is also quite a good scene. And then eventually, like when the beta timeline starts, like Fujiwara forces Kyon to get into Sasaki's closed space and then forces him to get into like the club room. And there Yasumi basically joins the two timelines together, and like everything goes like super confused. Haruhi's closed space appears again, and then Haruhi is kidnapped by Kuyosuo, and then Kyon jumps out the window to save her. We finally get Mikuru Asahina the Elder talking with Koizumi, and Koizumi being like finally involved in something supernatural again. And then the Celestials save Kyon and Haruhi. And then Kyon goes on a time travel into the future, and then he ends up in a like university campus and Haruhi's there. And then he goes back again into the past, but actually to the future compared to when he first jumped out the window to end up in Haruhi's bedroom. And that scene is like, what the hell is going on here? To give her a present for the SOS Brigade's 1-year anniversary. And then it's the first time where Kyon goes into the future, technically. And then the rest of the SOS Brigade members show up, and then they don't tell him anything, and then he goes back in time again. All that stuff is really cool. And Dissociation and Surprise, the concept is so good, and like the execution is good, but I really can't give it a Haruhi tier because I think it just drags on too much. It's like the problem Tanigawa has in the later series and the later stories. It's just too much. It's like it drags on a lot. I think Dissociation and Surprise being adapted would actually be good for it because they could like cut the fat a little bit and make it a little bit more engaging and a little bit quicker. But the overall story, like I liked it a little bit less than I liked the first time I read it. But the overall story is still amazing. It's still super good. So it's clearly a Koizumi tier at least. It's super important for the timeline. Oh, I haven't even mentioned like Sasaki is a really cool character. She's like Koizumi dialed up to 11. She's such an interesting character. She talks a lot. She's all philosophical stuff, all kind of meaningless philosophical stuff. But she clearly likes Kyon and she clearly cares a lot about Kyon. And it's heavily implied that she actually likes him more than just a friend, and it's heavily implied she will show up again. Kinda sad that Yasumi Watahashi doesn't show up again because Yasumi is so cute. But yeah, Dissociation and Surprise is kinda messy. Does some things very well, does some things not as well, unfortunately. I still think it's quite a good story, so I'm gonna put it in the Koizumi tier. Sadly, not in the Haruhi tier. Okay, so next we finally come to post-surprise stories, which is 7 Wonders Over Time. So this is like, I think this is the single story in the entire Haruhi Suzumiya series where Haruhi basically doesn't show up. So the entire plot is that there's a new student in Haruhi and Kyon's class, and she's a member of the Mystery Research Club, and she's like, oh yeah, Haruhi told me to drop here some stuff about like school mysteries, do whatever you want with that. And basically the entire plot is the members of the SOS Brigade, except Haruhi, deciding, oh yeah, if Haruhi sees this, she's just gonna create the 7 Wonders herself, so we might as well create the 7 Wonders. So basically, 7 Wonders Over Time is just the 4 members, basically just Kyon and Koizumi, just creating school mysteries for Haruhi, and like, it's such a cute idea. And it's kind of a new plot type for Haruhi, which is the SOS Brigade preventing Haruhi from doing damage to the world or altering the world preventively. And I think that's really a cool idea for future stories. And the stories themselves they come up with are kind of original and interesting by themselves. And it's also the introduction of the Mystery Research Club in T, which is an important character for the later story, and I really like T. Although we never find the name here. And this is kind of what Tanigawa loves to do, and I think he does very well, which is like introduce characters but not really telling who they are until they become relevant, and like implying stuff. And I think that's a really interesting way to construct a story. So yeah, 7 Wonders of Time, I'm putting it in the Nagato tier. I don't think it's a top tier story, but it's a solid B tier story. Like, I think it's quite a solid story, and I really enjoyed rereading it. Okay, next it's Tsuruya's Challenge. Tsuruya's Challenge is kind of uneven, where it starts off very slow, with Koizumi and T going on a rampage about mysteries. And I think it shows that Tanigawa is kind of using Haruhi just to talk about whatever he likes. And he clearly likes mysteries and RPG games and old games. I think that's a little bit detrimental to the series, where he just kinda does whatever he wants, and he kinda needed an editor to like cut on the mystery stuff, because it's not really important for the rest of the plot. Koizumi and T discussing the mysteries and like the late queen problem and whatever else they talk about there. The story starts off really slow, but then it starts becoming better when the actual Tsuruya's Challenge happens. And basically Tsuruya's Challenge is just Tsuruya sends the SOS Brigade and T, which is like there in the club room for whatever reason. Like, we know why she's there later. She sends like stories of her travels along the world in like parties and whatever. This serves to introduce both Tsuruya better as a character, and later we find out more about T as well. And like, the stories themselves are cute, and they go a little bit too long. Again, Tanigawa loves to write. They go a little bit too long, they could have been a little bit trimmed down. But overall, the stories themselves are fun. Some things are kind of lost in translation, where name pun on the last character is kind of lost in translation a little bit. But other than that, Tsuruya's Challenge is kind of quite good, and it's good because it's a layered mystery. There's a bunch of different layers that develop as the story goes on. So it's not just a plain mystery. The first mystery is who killed the guy or who attacked the guy. Then who's the girl in the story. Then it's, are the stories even real? And then it's, where is Tsuruya? And like, that layered structure is super interesting. I think it's very well constructed. T herself is, I really like her as a character, as a Deniscent, like a foreign transfer student. She's like a rich girl, she knows Tsuruya. Clearly there's something more about her that we don't know about. There's like something there. I really like her, like her interaction, like the way she speaks. I like how she looks, like in the illustrations. Like, she's a really, really fun character. A great addition to the cast, and I really want to see her appear more times. The problem is that it's a little bit too long at points. It does add like a supernatural commentary at the end, where Koizumi is like, maybe Haruhi is actually changing the solution to the puzzle without anyone realizing, which is kind of another layer to the Tsuruya's Challenge stuff. But overall, Tsuruya's Challenge is quite a good story, and I'm gonna put it in the Nagato tier, like middle of the road. If it wasn't, like, if the beginning wasn't as boring as it is, I'd probably put it in the Koizumi tier, but now it's in the Nagato tier. So now we come to the final story, and this is the one where I said at the beginning I wasn't going to put it in chronological order. And that story is the new one that just came out, which is the theater of Haruhi Suzumiya. And this is like I just read it like 2 days ago, and the impression I got from it is that it's kind of a fan-made story. It kind of has that feeling where it feels a little bit wonky at points. Like, it's not bad. I don't think theater is bad or anything. I just think it's not written in a very cohesive way. So basically the concept of theater is that SOS Brigade is kind of stuck in a world where they have to follow a series of like plot lines from stories, from like generic stories. They have to like find a way to escape that. But the problem with that concept is that the execution is not exactly what you'd expect, because the cast doesn't know they are stuck in that kind of loop of like stories until the middle of the story. And the reason why that is because the theater of Haruhi Suzumiya was adapted from short stories that Tanigawa wrote back in 2004, so like 20 years ago. Act 1 and Act 2 were adapted from those short stories and made into like a big novel. And you can really tell that it's kind of cobbled together from different stories, because from the beginning, like, neither Kyon nor Koizumi nor Nagato really question what's happening until like more than halfway. And even then they're like, oh yeah, our memories are being manipulated, we can't talk about this without being stopped. And that just kind of forces the story to go back into the whole theater aspect of them living through the stories. Like, the stories themselves are good. Like, each individual story of like the SOS Brigade they first start in like a fantasy RPG world, then they go into a space battle thingy, kind of like the Day of the Sagittarius. Then it's the Western. Then they go into like Chicago, 1920s Chicago. Then they go into like Spanish galleon and like a ghost ship. And then finally they end up in Troy. And all those stories are interesting, but it's not really that cohesive until like midway through. And I think it's just a bit too confusing at the start to like hit. Because like the SOS Brigade getting stuck in weird situations is kind of common, but them getting that stuck, like, and not realizing they are stuck doesn't happen too often. And that's kind of like, that never happened. They always realize what's going wrong and they try to stop it. But because the theater is more interesting in like showing the weird storylines Tanigawa created, it kind of ends up not being that cohesive of a story. On the other end, I think like all the outfits, like there's tons of illustrations for the story. All the outfits are great, like of the girls especially, and even KyoAni and Koizumi get really great outfits. At the end, we finally get the goddess artwork become real. So like there's this artwork for Haruhi. There's like Haruhi herself, Nagato and Mikuru dressed in like goddess outfits, like Greek goddess outfits. And I knew those artworks existed for like the longest time and I really want to own them. But they weren't really canon. They were like, I think, some special illustrations for like something. But Tanigawa basically wrote the final part of the story to create those artworks and make them canon, and they appear in the actual illustrations of the story. And I was like, yes, the goddess illustrations are real. They actually really turn into goddesses at the end. That becomes like important for the actual story. So that was really fun. I really enjoyed that part. However, like, I did like that. And the theater is also the first canonical mention of the Heavenly Canopy Dominion. It's heavily implied they are the masterminds behind the kind of theater thingy. But the problem is that the theater is basically non-canon, because at the end it's revealed that the way they escape the theater, the pseudo-parallel world, there's like an entire thing about superposition, quantum superposition. They are like in reality and also outside reality, and also in this like parallel reality at the same time. That stuff is that's like a good explanation, but like the resolution Nagato came up with is a bit lame and basically makes the entire sequence non-canon. And that's kind of why I put it at the end and not chronologically where it should have happened, because the theater happens between Live Alive and the Day of Sagittarius. It happens right after the cultural festival, but the entire sequence was like a dream sequence and they don't remember anything, so it's kind of non-canon. So at the end the resolution is kind of lame. It's heavily implied that the old man that helped them at the end kind of came to the real world in the form of like an owl, and Nagato, like Kyon's sister, is kind of important too for the resolution. Like, that's fine, but like the fact that it's non-canon and it's so wonky, the stories are so wonky and not really connect very well to each other, kind of left me feeling like, yeah, this is okay, but it's not really Tanigawa at his best. Also, the theater is canon in the sense that it is mentioned in the Snowy Mountain Syndrome, like Kyon mentions Koizumi using an harp. So in that sense it is canon, but the way it's written and the resolution pretty much makes it non-canon, and they're like, yeah, we can't have our memories, so we are gonna lock them away. Alright, fine. It's kind of a dream sequence, fine. Like, it's fun, it's fine. It's kind of a non-canon story. So I can't put it in higher than the Mikuru tier. It's kind of disappointed. We waited for 4 years for the theater to come out, and in the end, it's kind of a non-canon story. That's the first half. It's kind of like reusing stories Tanigawa already wrote 20 years ago. So in that sense, the theater is kind of was a little bit disappointing, to be honest. But yeah, Mikuru tier, like, it's not terrible. I still enjoy my time with it, but seeing new Haruhi Suzumiya stories is always a joy for me. But it was a little bit disappointing, not gonna lie. And with that, we reached the end of the judging of Haruhi Suzumiya, or whatever I call this video. I'm gonna try and make the actual tier lists available online in like the tier list maker site, if you do want to rank the series like I did. If you are hearing this, I probably managed to make it, and I'll put a link in the description. Oh yeah, before I go, let me just make general comments about the series a bit off the cuff. So, as you can probably tell, I love Haruhi. Like, I think it's one of my favorite series of all time. Like, it's my favorite series of all time. And Haruhi is really important for me. It was one of the first anime I ever watched. And the fact it's so different from anything out there kinda makes it special for me. Although, the problem, and I think Haruhi, before this appearance, is really solid story. I think even the stories I rated a little bit low, I still love them. After that, there's like the second Haruhi era, which is like between Disappearance, Surprise, which I think the story goes in a good way, and I think Surprise, Dissociation and Surprise is a good climax for that stuff. But since then, since 2011, the third Haruhi era is kinda floundering a little bit. Intuition and now Theater it's been 13 years since Surprise. Intuition in 2020 and now Theater in 2024. They really don't advance the plot at all, although I think Tanigawa is a great writer and is putting some great hints about what's going to happen next between College Haruhi, T, the artifact. I really hope we see an actual end to Haruhi. I really hope we get a resolution to the story soon, in like the next 5 years or so, just because I think it's time for the series to reach an ending, not remaining like pseudo hiatus for forever. I think Tanigawa could really have used a better editor to like rein in some of his more outlandish tendencies to like ramble on. As a writer, like I know what that feels like to like have crazy ideas that like when someone points them out, you're like, oh yeah, that was a bad idea. So I really hope Tanigawa gets a new editor that's a little bit more that like reins him in, or maybe he's even more off the rails and this is like the sanitized version of what he initially wrote, in which case I'm kind of concerned about him. But yeah, I do hope at this point in time, I do hope we see an ending to Haruhi, a definitive ending, like the end of the story. And I think Tanigawa is cooking something. I just hope it doesn't take another 10 years for him to finish cooking. We are kind of starving. In terms of if there's any chance we might see a new anime series, I think it's not high, especially after the KyoAni announcement like a few months ago. That was kind of nothing related to Haruhi, although Koizumi's voice actor was there. Like, Haruhi is moving again, like they are releasing a new song, people crowdfunded. Kyon has like new voice lines, the voice actor for Kyon has like new voice lines to promote theater. The books are coming out more frequently in quotes, so there's a chance Haruhi might make a comeback sometime in the next few years. I wouldn't count on it. Like the chance went from like 1% to like 5%. I think it's there, but it's kinda the problem with Haruhi. It's kinda like it's lost its mainstream appeal now. The community has moved on. Like Haruhi is not the go must-watch show it was 10 years ago, or 15 years ago, or 20 years ago when the first season came out. So that's kind of why I don't think there's a very high chance of a new anime series dropping. Then again, the industry has been kind of releasing sequels to unexpected series recently, like Spice and Wolf got a reboot, Devil's a Part-Timer got a sequel. So maybe there's a chance Haruhi gets a new life. The problem is really capturing the new fans and have them watch Haruhi. So maybe a Haruhi reboot is more likely than a brand new series, or at least a reboot of like the first season, because the first season is like a bit dated at this point. It's like almost 20 years old. So I think that actually has a higher chance to happen compared to a brand new series or a sequel or Haruhi Season 3. But yeah, that's my overall thoughts. Leave in the comments below what you think about the series, where the series is going, if you disagree or agree with my rankings. And yeah, this is kind of a love letter to Haruhi. I hope we see more of it in the future. And I hope I get to make more like these rambling, talking videos more in the future. I have some plans. It really depends on like my health. But anyway, that's all for me today. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time. Bye bye!